And welcome back, everybody, to episode 33 of the Titans of Today podcast. Our guest is Kunal Mehta, former Bain partner, and now the CEO of the Pipeline Group. Kunal, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to see you, Jacob. Nice to be on the show.
Absolutely. So we were just talking a little bit about life outside of business, but today we are going to talk all about GTM, and we'll get back to those other subjects later in the show. So when it comes to go-to-market, obviously it's one of the most important skills to have in a business and one of the most important aspects or processes to do right. You can have a great service, you can have a great product, but you got to get people to buy it and to know about it. So what if you were going to start a new company, let's say you're going to launch a tech product, what would be your primary go-to-market approach to win in today's market?
Yeah, I think that's Jacob, that's a great question. What way, just for context for your listeners, I started my career in revenue producing roles, and it really spans across three areas. The first is RevOps, the second is running marketing, and the third I ran the P&L for a company called Infoblox, which was acquired by Vista Equity, which is how I made my way into the private equity world. And had a lot of at-bats working with a lot of different companies, in addition to installing a lot of standard operating procedures at Vista. And so a lot of my experience comes from what we learned over that period of time. I would say, that when I look at a go-to-market, I look at two fundamental areas. There's two ways to measure it. The first way is we can just look at the economic definition of productivity, where it equals efficiency plus effectiveness. Efficiency is asking yourself, are we making everything in the organization as crayon simple, from quoting to forecasting as examples? And effectiveness is are we generating value for with every conversation for our buyers or prospects at each touch point? And those are the areas that we look to improve. And there's lots of work streams underneath those. Now, if you look at a financially driven metric, if you're a financial sponsor, you're going to measure go-to-market with something called the magic number, which is year-over-year growth divided by the amount I spend on sales and marketing. So if I'm Merck, as an example, and I spend $1 on sales and marketing, and I'm getting 6 cents in revenue growth, and if my comparables are at 51 cents, then I can say, hey, I'm Merck, and I need, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement. So in general, where we start is we look at, is the go-to-market efficient or not? And we compare, ourselves and our return on sales and marketing relative to comparables. And then we decide, if we're under, we're going to, launch a playbook to improve the efficiency there. That's like the general theme of how we look at a go-to-market. Is it efficient or not efficient?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I appreciate about you, and we're going to get deep into to really unearth a lot of this stuff for the people who don't approach it this way at the moment, and that's your quantitative approach first. Most people will say you need to, understand the business, you need to know the market intimately, and those things are important. But especially when you're coming in from the standpoint of, let's say, in private equity, where you may have some specialization within a field, have done and invested in other companies like that, but still, there's differentiations in different products, different services, and the way things go. But this quantitative approach and coming in and putting in the right playbook, allows you to kind of, we'll just use the term, see through a lot of those things, get down to the root numbers, and then engineer solutions. So tell us about that approach and perspective again, because a lot of people don't have that experience, and private equity is exceptional at that one thing. That's why they're in private equity, because, being able to come into any business that is within a fine scope of what you're looking for, and then engineer growth predictably and repeatably is kind of like magic. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So when I moved I moved with a team from Vista Equity to another private equity firm called TCV, which is based out of Menlo Park. And the team was really focused on a handful. I would say they're ruthlessly simple metrics, but a lot of people don't understand them, including the portfolio company. So the investor might say something like this: hey, your magic number's off relative to your comparables, go fix it. The very next call is from the CEO or the CRO or the CMO saying, hey, can you just translate back what that means? And then how do we move the needle on that metric? So in that particular case, like what we ended up doing, the investor would look at like almost 20 metrics. It could be anything from the magic number being off. It could be your CAC to LT, your customer lifetime value is off. And we actually documented each of the things these investors ask for, and we build playbooks around that. But typically, if the magic number's off, we almost always start. Um, Whether it was Vista, they called it CapDB. At TCV, we called it propensity modeling. At Bain, we called it money map. But it was all the same thing. Where do accounts have the highest propensity to buy? What are those accounts? And it's really an exercise. It's a statistics exercise in saying, where have you been successful winning? What are variables that drove that win? So as an example, there could be firmographic. You could be, excellent in certain revenue ranges or FTE ranges or certain industries, where the real art is in finding the other variables. Like, for example, if we're working at a portfolio company, we might find the win rates when Workday is installed 3.5 times higher. Whereas if SAP or a certain component of SAP is installed, it might be half the win rate, right? And it allows us to build a propensity model that says, these are where you're winning and this is why. And if your win rate's higher in Workday, we're gonna target accounts where Workday is installed. So step one, and we over Vista, TCV, and Bain, if we look at 90 installations of propensity models, a year later, 86% of the closed won will come from A accounts. So it is a great place to start. 100% of the time when you build a model, what you're going to find is that the territories are out of balance. So Jacob, if you have 10 C accounts and I have 10 A accounts, and we've designed your territory poorly because we've given you a lot of bad accounts. What most companies do is when most CROs will look at is like, what's your quota attainment? And it's very single threaded. But if I built your territory wrong, you might actually be, because I've given you all C reps, you might actually be a better rep, right? So the very next thing we do after the propensity model is we balance the territories in a way where everybody has their fair share of A accounts. And then we focus marketing just on going after A accounts. If I just look at step one, building the propensity model, you're almost moving that magic number that I talked about, 8 cents, because now you have the company's focus, you have the territories designed correctly, and you're going after the accounts where you have the highest propensity to win. And that's just new logo. If I look at existing accounts, you can almost run the same exercise. What are my accounts that have the highest propensity to expand by product, and who are they? So again, that 1-2 punch moves the needle on its own. And then we start to execute other parts of the playbook right after that.
And how much qualitative information or perspective is brought into this? Because it seems like it's heavily quantitative, which allows you to decipher that information and get down to how do we drive those most important numbers up, which is absolutely critical. How is qualitative information applied in this? And what about for companies that don't know too much about their market or let's say don't have the data that maybe a more advanced stage company may have?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You're always like working with the portfolio company because you have to be able to explain, they have to be able to explain it to their people, the model, to get the right buy-in. So I'd say number one, we have to, because it's like heavily statistics based and analytical, ultimately you got to bring it down to why this model works, why it's been successful, what the data is. I think Vista was very good at explaining their standard operating procedures and why they work and what the impact was. But the other thing they brought to market was, because at the time they had 60 companies, right? They had more insight. They also made you install a business operating framework. So they had more insight to drive, to balance the qualitative and the quantitative story. So as an example, if I looked at, all the close won opportunities there, and I asked myself, how do I know an opportunity has an 80% chance to close? They produce something called 3-2-1. So if I'm at Infoblox and I'm selling networking software and I have a relationship with that buying center, I have a relationship with the security buying center, and I have a relationship with procurement, that's the 3 in 3-2-1. What the two was, and which is a highly correlated variable, is I had to have two contacts in each. But the way a contact is being defined is like, Jacob, if I text you and you text me back, we call that an engaged contact. That would be the two. So you wanted two engaged contacts in each of those. So again, in Infoblox's example, it'd be two in networking, two in security, two in procurement. And then you needed one champion. When I achieved 3-2-1, that opportunity had an 80% chance to close. So when I'm matching quantitative and qualitative, like the two stories kind of need to come together. Like again, I grew up like on a horse farm, and like one of the most interesting things that I saw is like when a horse is pulling weight, one horse pulls like 2,000 pounds, but two horses pulls like 10,000 pounds, right? So it's kind of the same thing when you're matching quantitative and qualitative. You're using both methods to kind of get the story on why the playbook makes the most sense and what the impact is going to be and how it's going to improve your life as a seller.
And then the one was the three. I got the three and the two. What was the one? I'm over here
The
taking
one was you need a champion,
the champion,
in
right?
the company. And like, again, if you're a Vista, you're equipping the champion internally to tell your story, right? And bring the right people to the next set of meetings. So the champion almost has as much like skin in the game there to help you win as anyone else. So that is the one in 3-2-1.
Wonderful. And then let's say a company is earlier in their go-to-market, they're just coming to market. How do they go about gathering this data? They just need to do a lot of marketing to get interaction, test different offers and kind of different angles of their offer, or what would that approach look like?
So like I would say one of the things that companies, let's say a company only has 10 or 15 customers. You're right that looking at the win data might not be, relevant because you don't have enough enough wins yet. One of the things we would do is we would use competitors as a proxy, and we could get the installation of those competitors, right, and start to make we could start to build a much richer ideal customer profile based on what you want to look like and where we've been winning before. I think a point that you brought up, which is really weak in go-to-market, and I'm glad you brought it up, is this testing of things in general. Most companies should be testing 10 to 20, especially in marketing. Like, two facts I'll leave your listeners with is like, again, 40% of leads, they have no disposition. So if you're a financial sponsor and you're coming in, it would not be unusual to cut the marketing program dollars 20% right out of the gate without even having said hello, right? And it's because they know like it's very difficult for marketing to report ROI when 40% of the leads have no disposition. It's a big black hole. So that's problem one. But problem two is most marketing leaders, they need to become experts at A/B testing. What is working? It's really easy to spend a lot of money in digital and get no results. So, and we've seen many instances of that. Again, it's another reason why program dollars get cut, but the testing and learning is like, hey, what is working? Which keywords are working? We used to use tools that said like they would declare a winner on a web form. This one has the highest conversion rate, but you have to become an expert, I would say, in A/B testing. And this is like an incredible weakness across the board that you see in a lot of, in Portco companies in general.
People just want things to work.
They want things to work, but
this is the way it should go.
Yeah. But if you're a financial sponsor, it's really like, hey, I'm giving you $2 and you give me 10. And you got to prove it. All right. And it becomes really hard to prove when you have like 40% of your leads with no disposition. And the other big mistake is when you send leads to sales reps, on average, they give up after 4 attempts. But in all the data that I've seen, it takes like 26 attempts to reach the buyer. So you have this massive gap. I think 100% of the time, Jacob, when we've reprocessed old MQLs and closed lost, we found gold dust enough gold dust that would, deliver an ROI on its own. right?
Mhm.
And prove the value of the marketing spend. But that's almost like what we almost, because they've spent the money on the leads already, they found the right person, it generated an MQL or a closed, an opportunity. We almost always will reprocess those. And because of just the fundamental flaws in how leads are dispositioned, reps giving up too early. And if I was a rep, I started as a rep. I'm not sure I would call anyone 26 times right. I'd probably give up after 2 or 3 times. So you have to, build your process around keep trying. Like if you look, I don't know how data centric you want to get, but if you look
Sure.
at leads, what you typically see, and these are on close one opportunities. Let's say it takes 26 attempts. People put them into a cadence tool with 10 or 14 steps, right? Whether it's SalesLoft or Outreach or HubSpot, the data almost always shows like I put them into the cadence, they went through the 10 to 14 steps, and then we threw them back into nurture, which is too early. Then the lead scores again. We stick them into the cadence, we don't get a hold of them. And you see this vicious cycle of score, nurture, score, nurture. So one of the unlocks I would say is like if you have a lead come in and it's on average going to take 26 attempts, don't send them into nurture so quickly. Like there's 3 ways out for a lead. We either disqualify it, we get a meeting set, or we keep trying. In the pipeline group data set, we've had close one where it took 70 attempts, reach the person. People are just busy, right?
Right.
Not gonna take a lot of people don't take calls. You got to get to them a different way.
Right. Especially if you multiply that by the 3-2-1.
Yeah. Oh
Now
yeah,
you
for sure.
expanded that, you're talking about enterprise accounts, the different interactions. And I would 100% echo that and say that where I've seen the most success always in business is just that continuous persistence. I think the resurgence, or let's say the emergence of this content driven approach is obviously fantastic, and we want to lead with information that's valuable. But at the same time, uh, what it was for us, I remember we talked about this in the first conversation, was you should actually go through 5 to 7 no's. That's one thing I didn't mention in our first combo. That's what it was for us. It was 5 to 7 no's. So most people hear no or not now, and they never follow up with the lead. They never go back. They assume it's never going to be, there's never an opportunity there. And, that 26 attempts, the other thing I see commonly is people say, well, they want people to come to them. There's like, hey, I want this person to come and do business with me,
Yeah.
and it's like, the world isn't always like that. And even if we just take out the factor that, that we don't know, like I said, we don't know the disposition fully yet. If we just take that factor out and we just say, well, let's realize this person is very busy. And in the world today, you need to make sure that people understand the true value of your product. And that may take multiple attempts. It may take multiple follow-ups. It may take, multiple resources, but it's that persistence, which is, the differentiating factor where a private equity firm can come in and just pick up the gold dust, as you say, by doing the basics.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and I think the basics are, it's, and we'll go through this in a moment. You triggered a thought though, like one of the things, like I want people to come in ready to buy as well. And that is like the role to me of marketing, right? So
Mm.
at Bain, we had this study called the Day One List, which my colleague Rishi Dave ran with Google. And the basic insight was if I'm going to market to look for a solution, on average, I will self-find 3 solutions on my own without picking up the phone and calling anyone, right? And the insight is 92% of the time, they will choose one of those 3 solutions. So how do you get on the day one list? And this was true across all buying journeys, all ASPs, all industries, right? We find people like, and if you look at yourself as a consumer, you're probably doing a lot of self-research on your own before you figure out what to buy. It's the same is true for a business buyer as well. I think the other interesting thing in that study is because it's been done for a number of years. And just to your 3-2-1 point, when we looked at the buying committees, a decade ago, there might be 9 decision makers. Now there's over 20 involved in the buying process, which makes that 3-2-1 all the more important as you think about how to canvas an account.
Most definitely. And there's a few elements that I want to crack into that will be very valuable. Like, how do you solve the disposition problem? At the top of funnel level, or really where it needs to occur. But I think the most fundamental part to detail before we go further is that data architecture about properly taking in, organizing, and making sure this information is, accessible and quantified appropriately and maybe visualized as well. How do you go about getting the right data architecture in place to bring all these things so that you can utilize and execute on some of these plans?
Yeah, so maybe I start with like, at TCV I talked about, or Bain, or this, that we start with this propensity model. Kind of the next step is like, okay, I know who my A accounts are. How do I canvas and go after that? At TCV, it was just an associate and I working on go to market. So the fundamental approach, like if you think of a garden hose, if I just pour a tiny bit of water, I'm never going to see where the leaks are, right? Our basic philosophy is let's fill the funnel and flood it.
Hmm.
And then with the sales leadership team, sometimes we have to do it, it in lieu of the sales leadership team. We pushed really hard to find where the blockages were down the cycle. So what does it take to do that? I think is what you're asking. Is like uh, to me, the XDR is critically important because we are preparing them to like go after A accounts immediately. So we at TCV, we used the pipeline group 13 times because they were instrumented for calling. Right. And calling converts, if I pick up the phone and talk to you, Jacob, I have a 2.8% chance of getting a meeting. If I email you, I have a 0.26%. If you ask me for anything, like as a follow-up, I have an 8% chance of getting a meeting. So I immediately, like through marketing motions and TPG, fill the funnel at the top of the funnel as fast as I can. And then I look for where are the blockages. So if I'm at a company, like typically what I would look at is like, what is my connect rate, which will tell me is my propensity model working or not. So if my connect rate is like 1%, I got to go back and redo the propensity model. Something's not right. Usually I'd expect it to be like 3 or 4%, which is incredible because I look at all the off the shelf tools, like, some of those dialers are a click to connect. Some of them are hand dial. Some of them are power dialers. They're not going to get, they're going to be a connect rate of 0.1 to 1% max, right?
Yes.
So right away, I've driven productivity with the calling or my connect rates, but then I look at what percentage of my live conversations turn into meetings, right? So if I connect and anything under 10% of my live conversations not turning into meetings, then there's something wrong with our like. So for example, if a conversation, the way, like, again, the way we work it at the pipeline group, I'll give you an example, but this is how I think it should generally work, right? If you have an inbound lead and it comes in like orange means it's hot, right? It's a form fill, it's a, trial, they emailed us in. The dialer starts going on, and when it connects, the conversation guide comes up on the second screen, which is in context to the lead. That's it, inbound. And then outbound is similar. But if I have less than a 10% rate, something's wrong. My conversation guide's off, or I have the SDR needs more training. Once I set up a meeting, 50% of those should convert to a second meeting or an opportunity, right? So there'll be examples when I was at TCV where 94% of the meetings we set up didn't convert to a second meeting. I immediately need to go in and solve that. There's something wrong. So what do I do? You can ask the reps 3 questions. They had 30 reps in this case. It's like, what do you sell? Who do you sell to? And what do you need to sell more? They sound like simple questions, but when you ask someone, what do they sell? If you get 30 answers, there's something wrong with the messaging, or the reps haven't been enabled on the messaging. If I ask, who do you sell to? And I get more than like 4 or 5 personas, in that case, I got 70 titles, right? So they were unclear on who the buyer was. And then what do you need to sell more is like, I'm trying to judge who's going to give me constructive feedback in the future. And like a good answer would be like, if I just had 1, 2, or 3, I could sell X% more. A bad answer would be like marketing leads suck, or, complains about other parts of the organization. And then in my head, I'm going A rep, B rep, C rep, right?
Mm.
And like, if I need constructive feedback, I have my list of people to talk to. But what we do, like, we have a benchmark for if on connect rates, and if we're under it, it tells us something. If we have a live conversation and how much follows up, it should be like 8%, right? If it's under, something's wrong, right? So we need to inspect, and we have the benchmarks with the other companies we work with. If my scheduled meetings don't convert into an opportunity at a certain rate, something's wrong. So when I was at TCV and we were rapidly trying to figure out what was wrong, this was incredibly helpful in terms of loading up the top of the funnel, pushing and seeing where all the issues were. And then on a step-by-step basis, fixing.
And how do you see the transformation across the timeline of a company from origin to, sometimes when you come in and engage with those much later stage companies with TCV? How do you see the transformation and the evolution of how they're tracking all this data and reporting all this data and communicating about this data? You mentioned AREPs, which I think is something would be great. How do AREPs communicate, and how do AREPs track this information, and how do A businesses, to put it in that case, do that across the company lifecycle?
Yeah. So how do we see? So let me start. Like, one of the things, like, this is I think a lot of marketing departments analytically are not as strong as like the sales ops people are, right? And one of the things we immediately do is we'll ask the marketing leader to build a marketing contribution model that basically says, hey, you're responsible for 30% of the close one revenue. Walk me through how many opportunities that is, how many you need in the pipeline, how many, all the way up to how many meetings is that, how many leads is that. Like, at first it's challenging, but when you look a year down the road, these marketing leaders become like really good at figuring out like what, much more precision on what they need to move the needle. I think that's like step one. Like, let's do the math together so we know what we're measuring. We can have leading indicators. Like, in that company's case that I was talking about, I knew, like, and even the marketing leader was the one who told us, right? Because we built the marketing contribution model together. If they're not generating 50 meetings a week, and like at the TCV level, I had a Bloomberg terminal. I could see every portfolio company, right? If they were under in week 2 and week 3 and week 4, we were going to have an issue with the pipeline generation. So again, these contribution models for sales, marketing, channel really matter. It allows you to figure out much earlier in the quarter what you can do immediately to move the needle. I think a lot of times companies are way too late by the time they determine something, they need to intervene. And then they intervene in a really, maybe they over rotate. So again, I think driving the analytics starts with things like the marketing contribution model, the propensity model. But I also think the other benefit that companies get when you're inside of a financial sponsor, and again, I can use Vista and TCV as examples, is they are very good at sharing what other portfolio companies are doing. And, in the case of Vista, if it's really good, they'll codify it and then they'll manufacture it and install it at scale through their consulting group across the rest of the portfolio. TCV was similar in that fashion, but we had a lot of minority companies in that case. So we were more operating through influence. But if companies were doing something really well, we would also codify that and start to install it at scale. I think financial sponsors in this area are vary in their quality to build standard operating procedures. But I can tell you, if you are part of a portfolio of a lot of companies, there is a huge opportunity for you to learn from your peers at those other companies. And there's a huge opportunity for the financial sponsor to unearth really what's working. Whether, when we did this, we would always find like, hey, in sales ops at TCV, there were 3 superstars, right, out of the portfolio. And we, not only were we learning from them, we were codifying them, but when we wanted to move them to a different company, those were the 3 that we would move from company to company. So again, it's also about talent, not only just codifying the procedures, but finding the best talent and then, giving that talent the opportunity to move from one company to the other. I think certain companies do that really, really well. And then you go even faster on the next one.
And so at the heart, it's all about this precision, this quantification, being able to understand what the number is and being able to drive that number.
Yeah. Yeah, when we were talking about the definition of productivity, right? Equals efficiency plus effectiveness. One of the areas that I think has been not as well respected across like 30 financial sponsors that I work with is enablement, because it often looks like a random set of acts or a checklist of activities that they're doing. Some of the and I learned this through one of the companies we were working with that had an incredibly like diligent way. So if they had 100 sales reps, not that I'm just using this as an example. What they ended up doing is if you take a spreadsheet on productivity from high to low, and you put you put like, if it's 100 reps, you put 20 in tier one, 20 in tier two, 20 in tier three, so on and so forth. Tier one are your best reps, right? And they're extremely effective, and you want to make them more efficient. But typically tier one was driving 60 to 70% of the bookings. What every enablement shop, not everyone, but most of them do, they give you a one size fits all enablement strategy for every person. What this company was doing is they tiered the reps, and each tier had a different strategy. So if I'm tier one, they're effective. I don't need to do any enablement for them, right? I just need to make them more efficient. So the strategy in this company was they're just going to learn from each other, right? How are they overcoming objections? How are they defeating competitors? How are they, progressing opportunities? And then the role of the enablement team would be to codify what this tier is doing, right? From an efficiency perspective, they assign that tier a executive in the company to basically grease the wheels and remove any red tape. So now I got just that one thing. This productivity of the tier one reps went up like 8%,
Hmm.
right? Now you look at tier two. Tier two's like almost on the cusp of breaking out. So if you have 100 enablement dollars, 50 should go into tier two because they're on the cusp of just breaking out, and the productivity returns very high. So they got a lot of the face-to-face, a lot of the coaching. They got paired up with tier one reps, right? And, they're the ones that had the biggest improvement in productivity. It was almost like a 17% improvement in productivity in tier two. Tiers three, four, and five kind of got all the standard stuff. Uh, again, when we were a part of a Vista company, Vista was like looking at what this company was doing, and they were thinking, hey, can we run this like United Airlines runs, their frequent flyer program, where like the tier one's global services, right? And they're going to get all the activity, all the best benefits possible. Tier two's 1K. In a pilot, like, because the features of each tier were so good, the entire productivity went up because everybody wanted like the benefits of tier one services versus tier two. It's unfortunate we didn't roll that out, but like we just piloted it. But I still think like, from having a strategy for each tier was really effective. We've used that over and over again. I think the whole, can we build it like United Airlines builds their loyalty program and drive, increased productivity it's a good thesis to test. We only have a data point of 1 and it worked, but it would be good to have a data point of 30 to see if like this is the way to go.
For sure. The incentives are powerful things,
For sure. For sure.
driving up that productivity. Do you have any zero to hero stories, or you were brought into a situation where there was a complex challenge in an organization and you were able to execute these strategies? Any top case study that comes to your mind first?
Yeah, so I think the one, like, okay, so there was a company in Boston that had missed their number 2 quarters in a row. And a lot of companies, TCV would not touch if they were doing well, right? Like, what's the point? We don't want to get in the way of something that's working. But when they miss their number 2 quarters in a row, then the portfolio operations team can come in and start to partner with the CEO and their team on just driving success and or driving an improvement plan, I would say, right? So at this company in particular, they had missed 2 quarters in a row. And the technology that was inherited was really old, but had been modernized. So it was like ready to scale up, right? But we weren't seeing the results on the scale up. So This was the first instance where I actually used the pipeline group, right? And I'm like, I actually had tried to present the pipeline group to them and to others, but people wanted to build the function in-house. They weren't ready to outsource, right? So one of the things that this is the only company out of 60 that had built on their own an incredible propensity model. And I was like blown away with how data driven they were, but they were trying to build everything else internally, and their SDR team wasn't covering the ROI just on their salaries. They weren't generating enough pipeline. So we started with TPG there in that garden hose example where we're loading up the top of the funnel. So in the end, like, if I fast TPG put in, generate like 40% of the closed one, but they also got all the leads were dispositioned. So this was out of the 60 companies that I worked with, like across Vista, TCV, and Bain, this was the only company that had built a great propensity model. So they knew where to hunt. The rest of the organization, the apparatus behind it was not like operating well going after this. So, the first thing we did is I was able to convince them, let's use the pipeline group here. Right. And this is why they're going to canvas these A accounts faster than anyone else could. So we started there, and they started to generate a lot of meetings, right? And then we helped the company improve the conversion rates across the opportunity funnel. In the end, though, they ended up with 40% of the close one pipeline was sourced, by these TPG reps. And that company went from like, it was almost like, I think it was a 9 or 10x return for TCV. So that was probably the greatest success story. But then we installed, the pipeline group 12 other times. So it made it easier for us to build once we have one success, it makes it easier to scale the playbook. But I would say that was the start of how I got to work with the pipeline group, and see the results in action.
So to go back to the data architecture question and really just bring the root, is you need to have a ton of interactions and top line a pipeline that you can gather this data on. You can have interactions and really begin to understand your market on a deeper level.
Yeah, that's a good question. So people think building the BDR organization, to me, it's a fundamental lever because it's not just the cost of the XDR, right? You have the XDR manager. The other thing I noticed with data, like marketing might buy HG Insights, sales might buy Zoom, Europe might buy Apollo, they end up, but the skills in a portfolio company to aggregate all that data and generate the insight is really low, usually. So one of the benefits of using an outsourced company is they will be able to aggregate, a lot of different data sources and drive enrichment at both the account level for existing accounts, but for prospects as well. That is hard to do. So that's one thing that I have found weak overall. The other thing that's like, when you look at dialing, it's not like there's lots of ways to dial. There's the manual dial, there's the click to connect, there's the power dialing. The most modern way to dial is kind of a hybrid dial, right? Where you have live automation. You have 4 humans almost dialing somewhere, and then you have the AI dialer. The AI dialer is focused on mobile accounts, accounts where you have mobile numbers or you've connected with them before. The other things are like, the reason we use live agents is if I call Comcast, I'm spending a lot of time going through the telephone tree, right? And trying to figure out how to get to the right person. The right software will memorize, like, once I connect, that whole phone path and just do it for you. So again, that is hard to do at the individual company level. And then that reverse waterfall reporting, you have it not only for the portfolio company, but at the financial sponsor level. The financial sponsor, the biggest pain for them is understanding where to focus their time. If I have 50 companies in the portfolio, where am I going to focus my time? If I know across all 50 companies, the leading indicators and I know like the forecast, and the forecast is like 98% accurate, then I know I can red, yellow, green and say, hey, this company's off. I need to intervene or just ask what's going on here because they're not generating enough meetings to hit the number.
Hmm.
So we try to attack, like, not only help the portfolio company, but help the financial sponsor as well.
Well, let's talk about the art of great testing as well. So when you're going out to test different messages, let's say over phone or different scripts to determine, you mentioned that the best companies are the best at testing. So how can somebody who's not done a lot of A/B tests or maybe has, how can they improve that skill?
Yeah. So there's on the digital side, I'll say there's lots of tools to help you A/B test, but there, and we can go into detail on that. But the way, if you're testing a message in market, I can test two messages and really quickly look which one's generating more meetings for me. Especially like if I'm talking to 25 people a day, which is what an average SDR should do. They can test that message they'll get 25 data points a day. And if you have 4 SDRs, you have 100 data points in a day and 200 in 2 days and 500 by the end of the week. You'll know, like, you can declare a winner on which messaging is going to work for which persona. So on the actual messaging and the conversation guides, we're A/B testing that all the time and declaring a winner with live conversations. On the digital side, believe it or not, the color of a button and the size and the placement is all the number of questions you have on a form. It makes all the difference in the world on your
Hmm.
conversion rates. So on the digital side, you're gonna have a number of tests you can run from, like, colors and words and the right words to choose and what the button color should be. That you should have a deep, like, number of tests that you're gonna run every day. And because, like, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or, TikTok, you're gonna wanna keep testing different ways to and declaring a winner. Again, I've seen more times, especially on the digital side, which is, costs on the digital side probably over the last 3 years are up 40%, right? You can burn loads of money and have no result. We worked with a company that was like a Fortune 100 company, like none of the digital spend, like $0 contributed to pipeline. They didn't have the right keywords. The website wasn't optimized for organic search. So again, like, there's a lot of testing you can do. I think it's a whole novel we could write on testing, but I would just say, like, if you've never done it before, start with like 10 tests, in a month and see what happens. Right. And then, once you start to get good at it, then start to build out your testing infrastructure.
Focus on the calling and that live interaction. Where have you seen the most improvements and tweaks when it comes to a script? Because, when you're designing a script, there's only so many questions. It's only, let's say 3 to 5 minutes, an initial phone call. Where have you seen the tweaks having the greatest effect?
Yeah. So generally, like, the way the conversation guide is structured, like if you historically, it used to be static. I'm calling, so and so in this industry. And when I connect, a static conversation guide comes up. But now, because they can run them through Gen AI on the fly so quickly, I can deeply personalize the conversation guide to things that they were done in had that are super relevant to that person I just connected to. That level of engagement and personalization is like game changing in terms of generating more meetings. I would say, like, if you're not running conversation guides through Gen AI, you have a big missed opportunity. And I don't think many tools are doing that just yet, but there is
Right.
a big uplift in the number of meetings you will set. And then I think, again, when I look at all the assessments that we did, the one area where I see a lot of opportunity, a big unlock, is on follow up. If you're using HubSpot or something like that, you're opening like, I talked to you and you asked for a white paper, you're opening a task, but the task will just say something like, call Jacob back in a week. but you've lost context with why very quickly. So the follow-up needs to be done in a way that's also personalized. Like Jacob asked for this, since then I found out all these other things, like, and then the follow-up is going to be much more personalized as well. That 100% of the time, the follow-up is done poorly, and it's often done via email. I think over 80% of the time it's done via email, which has the lowest conversion rate. So if you want to improve stats on follow-up, just pick up the phone and call, and make sure you have context with why you're calling. And if you're just opening up a task, it's almost guaranteed you're going to lose context.
Mm-hmm. And so what tools would you recommend then for, you mentioned there's things you can do on the data side to be able to, take all this information in and be able to iterate like that. What tools are you seeing most popular today?
You mean you mean like, say that back again. Is that on the conversation guide or the propensity modeling, or?
Really just across the business, is there a set of tools that when you come into a company, you want to see these things in place, or, the different variations, there's likely many that solve particular problems, but what are the 4 or 5 things that if you're coming in, like we need this data source, we need this, and you're bringing them into one point, that propensity model or
Yeah.
systems?
So this is a bit of a, tough answer, because like, you can quickly explode the number of data sources you need, right? It's not just Zoom, but if I'm selling into federal, I need a federal database. If I'm selling into higher ed, I need a different database. If I'm selling in through K through 12, I need a different. So the number of databases one company could have what needs access to and be able to aggregate it could be a really big number. Like at the Pipeline Group, we aggregated 28 data sources, right? But we have like 6 people that do this. They wake up every day thinking about this, and they've done this for hundreds of companies. So the competency levels that because of the number of at-bats they get, they're really good at it. Bain was really good at it. TCV was good at it. Obviously Vista was good at it because they've been doing these propensity models, probably the earliest ones to do it. I find this competency in most portfolio companies to be lacking. So my suggestion there is, like, you can use another company to help you aggregate to build that propensity model. It'll be cheaper and faster. Like at the Pipeline Group, we just build it for you because we need our reps to be successful, and we want them hunting in the right spot. So we've aggregated all these data sources. We're building the list for our BDRs based on propensity models. And it allows us to go really fast. What I don't like, I know, like, is the cadence tools. When I was at TCV and we were evaluating companies, I had a hard time figuring out if SalesLoft or Outreach they were just clicking a bunch of buttons and just sitting back and doing nothing. It was really hard to tell because, it was so automated, right? And so at TCV, we generally preferred to move people off of those tools and onto calling. And it's probably a contrarian viewpoint, but, based on what I saw with, like, calling was 2.8, 10 and a half times more effective. I knew my BDRs were going to disposition the lead 100% of the time. So if I'm running marketing, I could at least get an ROI on my spend. And then because it took so many times to get the person, I didn't want to send him back to nurture so quickly. So I gravitated heavily in those playbooks towards, like, let's just call. And then when we have a conversation, we will take the intelligence of that conversation and then build email. So it's almost backwards. We don't start with the email. We call, we connect, we take the transcripts from those calls, and then that feeds the emails, whether it's follow up or, hey, your peer somewhere else, which we got on the first conversation. Then we'll reach out to that peer via email based on the conversation that we had with you. So it's a little bit of a different approach, but it's an approach that certainly worked for us.
And one thing that a lot of people should know as well, I think, is that, and you mentioned this, and it's been a theme throughout, is really the top of the top of funnel, the pipeline fuels information for product. It fuels information for sales. It fuels information for leadership to really have the pulse in the market. What are the issues? What are the things that are resonating? And that communication should be continuous and throughout, as things are flowing with the business. How have you seen that implemented successfully? Just the internal communications on top of that, on top of the data-driven approach. How are people approaching meetings when they're reporting their metrics and deciding what to do next among the team?
Right. So it's so funny when we were talking about the magic number. If you're a financial investor and you're saying, hey, your magic number's off, in the investor in their mind have combined sales and marketing as one unit, right? That number is my revenue. Like, what is my ROI? How much new sales am I getting for every dollar I'm putting into sales and marketing? They don't even differentiate sales and marketing is different. But when you go inside the portfolio company, sales and marketing is often like very different, right? They're often at odds with each other. So one of the things at TCV, we would just metric the sales leader and the marketing leader with one shared MBO. That forced them to almost always work together. And then, because like the SDR played the connective tissue between outbounding for the sales team and taking all the inbound. So we called it an all bound model. We would disposition all the leads. We would follow up on all the inbound. Each inbound had an SLA associated with it. So like orange is immediate, but blue is a trade show, right? That doesn't require a 5-minute SLA. And there's always it's almost always two use cases for like trade shows. We're going to call and make appointments before we even get there. And then we're going to follow up on the list. So that connective tissue, all the reporting drove a lot of connective tissue between sales and marketing. And then, again, marketing could say like, hey, all these leads, which we responded to and we built meetings on, that was the example where 94% of the sales meetings didn't convert to a second meeting. Marketing could say it's like, with data, it's not a marketing issue, it's a sales execution issue, right? At the same time, if none of the inbound leads that are disposition are working, then sales could say, hey, we have some work to do. Let's focus on these campaigns or think through these again. So I think I think one of the things your listeners should know is like, if you have a financial sponsor and they're saying words like sales and marketing efficiency or magic number, don't unnecessarily assume they're separating sales and marketing, and know like they typically have friction points. They're just looking at it as one unit. And again, it's important for them to know that, because they're going to need to operate as one unit. And the way financial sponsors get around that is they give the MBO, like for example, on the magic number, the revenue leader and the marketing leader will have one MBO that they have to hit. And then they need to sort it out. So again, that's one thing I would say where we try to get two departments to work together. That becomes really important.
The collaborative approach is much better than the competitive or contradictory approach of butting
It's
heads.
unfortunate. You're right. It's unfortunate. It's always, it's so at odds. I feel like as a financial, like for example, if at Vista you have one playbook and everybody has to use the same playbook, you almost by force are getting everyone to work together because they got to deliver that playbook, right? It's super effective. It may not be the best way, but it does work in terms of getting people to work together. When you give people too much choice on how they're going to build their go-to-market on the marketing side and the sales side, that's when you end up with a lot of disputed territory. Like if I'm interviewing a portfolio company and they have a separate sales ops, a separate marketing ops, and a separate rev ops, it's guaranteed like there's going to be a mess. So example one would be like, hey, let's just consolidate that into one rev ops. Let's make sure we have the right rev ops leader where we can see the vision across all three of these. Because otherwise you spend a lot of time, as soon as you hear arguing over stats or contribute, who's contributing to what, it's just a waste of time. So it's something that a financial sponsor is going to fix very, very quickly.
So building a single playbook then for all three and saying, this is our playbook, this is your responsibility, here's how we're going to collaborate, here's how we're going to work together. would drive massive change for probably a lot of companies if they just took that one step and implemented that right away.
For sure. The most important step is like the most important value creating move is picking the right CEO and the CRO. But very quickly after that, you're going to find a RevOps person, like a really good RevOps person come in to be the backbone of the data set. And they're going to want to consolidate, if there's separate sales, marketing, customer success ops, any other ops, they're going to consolidate it under one thing. They're going to streamline the tools so it all looks we're all speaking off the same, same playbook and same set of data.
And one other major takeaway here is do more phone calls. Do more phone calls. Do more phone calls. They work.
Yeah, definitely phone calls. Again, they convert at I think it's 2.8% was the last versus 0.26% for email. So, by the way, that's what's when we did the assessments, what we found is with SDRs is 75% of their activity is emailing. So they're focused on the lowest value or lowest converting tool to use to get meetings. So again, that's another reason why. And people will gravitate towards what's easy, I think.
And one of the things you mentioned that struck my mind was actually calling the company numbers, because normally what I've done and I've seen others do is just they don't even want to go through all the phone trees. They just said, is this a mobile lead? If it's a mobile lead, I'm calling it. If it's not, don't buy.
Yeah.
But you're actually saying that we should go through those.
I'm saying it's really because whether it's, if I look at the pipeline group, they've made 40 million calls, right? So they basically navigated every phone tree like in the global 2000. And there's not a lot of time with pressing buttons and getting to the right person at this point. But I would say that is a hugely inefficient, for most people that haven't done that already. And like just, when I was in DC, like the Comcast call center was there. Nobody answers the phone there. Somebody came in and threw a chair through the window because they couldn't get a hold of anyone at Comcast. And, so again, it's really hard to use those phone trees sometimes.
So call them or not call them?
Call them.
Call them.
Yeah.
But just get good at navigating it or work with somebody or get your SDRs in the right place so that they're thumbing through those things so we can get to that 3-2-1, because you want to get to the 3-2-1. And sometimes, hey, if, as I've seen, only 40% of contacts have a mobile number, where at least most data sources that I've utilized, 30 to 40%.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So,
I mean, even that's like, those are great, right? But even within our data set, like it's probably around that. And if we've already talked to you, we have a lot of data, we have your reachability scores, we have the times you prefer to be called. But I would say 30 to 40% is like optimistic.
And so what is the golden sequence then? More calls, but what does that golden sequence look like getting us to that 26 attempts to get the sale?
Yeah, so it's first you got to have your propensity model. Second is when you call, you're calling into A accounts with the right conversation guide. That's, run through Gen AI. So it leads to the most engagement when you actually connect with that person. But it's just muscle to get to the 26 or the 30 or the 50. You will get a hold of them. You just persistence is everything when it comes to SDRs. But, that part of it is hard to get, especially if you're dependent on a lot of cadence tools and you're saying, hey, we put them through the cadence. We didn't get all of them. We're going to send them to nurture. I think that's too easy of a way out.
And what about all those people that say, you call them, they pick up the phone, they say, I'm not interested right now. And they say,
that's like, so we have to train all of our SDRs. Like, I mean, if you're out, not inbound, but on outbound, you're starting with like, crap, they got a hold of me. You're starting from a really tough point. So you're going to hear like, I'm not interested. I don't have time. Our SDRs are trained to like go through all of those objections. You were talking about the time on a call. Like if I look at the whole TPG call set, if the 3 minutes is the optimal call length for converting to a meeting, it actually diminishes dramatically at 5 and at 1. Right. So at 5 minutes, forget it. They just want to talk, right?
Yeah.
About nothing.
There's a lot of
You-
those.
At a minute, you haven't generated enough value. So like when we onboard a new Portco, like we might start at a minute because we're learning, but we know we got it nailed when we're at like in that 3 minute mark.
Hmm.
We're humming, right? But it takes time. It takes like a couple months to get there because you could build the best propensity model, but you're still learning like how to sell this thing, what the value is. We're onboarding our own rep at the time, but we know we're in good place at the 3 minute mark. We're going to have the highest conversion rate.
Which makes it a lot easier to test as well, to go back to that question about how do you iterate on those live call scripts? Because if you're, contained within that 1 to 3 minutes, and you really want to keep them hooked by that 1 minute, then what you're really testing is, that initial value line of, okay, why are you calling? What are you calling?
Right.
What are you
So
selling?
one of the best things one of the best things we can do, which drives like almost like has probably the highest meeting rate. So if I take an example where I know like all the technology you've bought, like we would do this for our customers and say, like, you're selling at, product X. Here's all the technology that's out there, and here's vulnerability that we see. We can adjust the conversation guide to be much more specific to say, hey, we know you got these 3 technologies. We see some vulnerability here. We'd love to talk to you about how we address that vulnerability. Again, so when we talk about propensity modeling, we know also the competitive install set that's there. We also know the other competition, or they might not be competition. They might be other technology we bought. And then we can see where there's vulnerability. And then our conversation guide is much more in context to driving a meeting outcome.
Mhm. And then,
That's why those data sets are so critical, right? You're using them for insight outside in to get a meeting.
right, and that actually answers that earlier question, for, let's say, earlier stage or, just growing companies, is when you're designing a product or a service offering, let's say, like you said, in security, you should know the tools, or you should know the tools that exist. And I think, to add a word there, you said the competitive install set, but also, and you mentioned this, but you put a term on it, the complementary install set.
Right,
You do have some precognition or some way to say this could potentially be, and you need to just, again, have those tests and get out there in the market.
right, right. And when we get a meeting with that approach, typically the first meeting with the rep is one PowerPoint slide where we're showing like, hey, here's what we know about you. And then the SC will be like, hey, here's where we see vulnerability. And then it's like a really effective meeting because it looks like we've done our research. We come to this call. Usually the first thing out of the person's mouth is like, how did you get this information? Once we get past that, where we have a conversation on like, yeah, we have this, this, and this, but you're missing that. Or yeah, you might be right. Let's talk about like how you close the gap on that. So again, when we get, the gaining access piece to the first meeting, if we can connect the same approach, it's really effective.
You need to have that trigger point in their mind
Yep.
that it's one of their strategic goals or one of the problems they're experiencing that goes, wait, how did you know that?
Exactly. Exactly.
If you've got that trigger point, especially within one single PowerPoint slide, then you can really focus on the customer themselves and what, the sales process that's required to get them over the hump to buy and get them to the next level.
I completely agree.
And, as we look at going forward, the next 5 years, there's actually a stat that I just read, that the current AI agents market is valued at about 5 billion. And that's specific AI agent workflows. Yes, just to make the differentiation, there's the foundational models level, which is hundreds of billions. There's multiple companies that are doing extremely well, but really, like, adopted AI agents it's about 5 billion into current workflows. But they expect that market to grow. Actually, that was 2024. I will add one part there. They expect by 2030 that market will 100x to about 500 billion. So it's a huge market opportunity. And we're seeing a lot of different iterations of it. Some of these verticalized and specialized AI agents that are coming into play. What are you seeing as the most critical changes over the next 5 years? And, for companies that are consciously designing new strategies, how can they cut through the chaff and get through to what's really going to drive value, or continue to drive value if it's something that some of these existing principles, which we've talked about?
No, it's a good, like, so for example, the AI agent side, it is incredibly effective. So when I was at Bain, like before I even talked to someone, we had agents that went out to a website, and one agent would be like, I'm just like researching. The other agent might be like, I know I have a problem, but I don't know who I'm going to choose. And the other agent might be, I know I have a problem and I know exactly who I'm going to choose. And then it tells you how your website performs against those. It's incredibly effective. And
Wow.
when you're at Bain and you're saying like, hey, these are gaps in how your website's performing against these three personas. And then, the engagement will be like, here's the things you do to close the gap. And here's the moment of truth that switches someone from being interested to, being more of an opportunity to sell to them. So that's just one small example of how it gets used. I think we will start to use agents to make our propensity model even further refine that, so that up market, when we're helping companies get leads, we can just be much more effective at how we're going to drive those leads. So we're partnering with other companies right now to help us build some of those. And I think, again, I think it's super exciting. In the end, though, a human's always involved in terms of getting these meetings set. I don't see a day where, an enterprise sale is going to happen because an AI agent makes a call in. I always think a human's going to be there at some point, but they're being highly equipped through the information that AI, whether it's agents that are doing it or other tools that are driving insights. I think that's always going to require human, because there's a lot of knowledge to transfer, especially in technology sales.
So if there was one action step that people should implement today, would it be building that propensity model? Would it be really analyzing your business so that you can know if you're getting the right data, or what would be one step people should take today with their business?
Yeah, if they haven't built a propensity model, they should build a propensity model, because you're going to have an immediate ROI. You're going to know where your A's are. You're going to know why you win. You're going to know the technology that's correlated with winning versus buying. We did a project at an email security company where we found, like, if two other technologies were installed, our win rate went through the roof. And what we learned is our technology works better when those two were installed. That's an insight that, that only a project like propensity modeling is going to help you like scale, so that you can target every company with, those two technologies and tell a much better story. Like, hey, we work better together. I think if you have not done, like, again, out of the 60 companies that I've worked with, only one has really been disciplined about figuring out who their A accounts are. That is low hanging fruit to me, because you're going to get, again, when we do build it, you have you're getting 8 cents return per, right out of the gate. And because you're going to fix your territories, you're going to hunt in the right place, you're going to focus marketing. That to me is question one. Now, the next step is like, how do you canvas A accounts in the most efficient way? I talked about TPG a lot, but there's sales plays you might use and you might mechanize and automate that are going to help you be much more focused on getting A accounts to convert to opportunities. And that we're, again, at the Pipeline Group, we're starting to build out those sales plays to help companies get much more efficient at that. But, again, TPG is a way to canvas velocity wise, but there's sales plays underneath it that we could build that even improve the conversion rate faster. But yeah, start with propensity modeling.
Well, this has been absolutely insightful, valuable, and powerful for anybody and everybody who's going to listen back to it. I appreciate having you on the show, Kunal. It's been a pleasure to share your wisdom and insights here. So for all those people, the key takeaways, much of what Kunal just said, but really get down to the information that matters, those metrics that are going to drive results, and focus on getting those up. And I'm sure that we could keep going on this for much longer, Kunal, but I know you got to go. So,
hey, thanks, Jacob. I appreciate it. It was great meeting you. You wish your listeners well.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.